Hello and welcome back to the Cortright cast. My name is Alex Cortright and I'm joined by my brother Jonathan Cortright, and today we are talking about the unpredictable, illustrious, somewhat bombastic career of director Rian Johnson. From his first, I would say, major critical success, Looper, which was back in 2012? Yeah, I knew it. I actually got a date for once. I was like, I think that was 2012. All the way to the varied opinions about his interpretation, I think would be the nice way to say it, of Star Wars, The Last Jedi, to his, I would say, major redemption in Knives Out, which came out just a couple years back. So what is it to this director? What makes his films work? What didn't work about his short-lived outing with Star Wars? And how did he get it back? You know what? Knives Out was such a fantastic film.
Yeah.
Like, it really blew me away. And I know we have some differing opinions about The Last Jedi and his career before that. But I don't know about you, but I was just really surprised to come off of The Last Jedi straight into Knives Out and be so impressed and so ready for another Rian Johnson film. Like, feeling like I am a fan of Rian Johnson again. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I feel like his entire career is just a little bit hard to figure out. But let's start from the beginning.
Yeah, so Rian Johnson he's a very particular director, and he really likes to work within the confines of genres. Mm-hmm. Like, every one of his films can be like squarely put into a genre category. His first film, Brick, was basically like a classic noir detective story set in a high school, where there was a lot of humor played in the fact that they played it completely straight. They played it like it was Chinatown, but it's in a high school. Mm-hmm. And he had Joseph Gordon-Levitt in that. It's a really good movie. I think he funded it mostly like himself, or it was super, super low budget, very indie, but it had like all the hallmarks of his movies today.
Yeah.
Just on a very small budget and small scale. But it's a really solid movie, and it's really well written and very well directed. And then he moved on to The Brothers Bloom, which is a con man movie. And he had a bigger cast for that, a bigger budget for that. It was kind of like his chance, I guess. Yeah. And I think it's a really good movie. I like it a lot more than most people do. But it wasn't a huge success, and I think box office wise, it didn't do great.
It wasn't exactly what put his chance to be put on the map.
People really expected, like, after, because Brick was a big critical success, but not a lot of people saw it.
So he got his chance,
and then he sort of got his
Bloom, but it didn't
wider
quite perform
release
to what it should have been.
And it didn't do bad. Like, people like that movie generally. Mm-hmm. It just wasn't the success that he needed at the time. And then I think there was 4 years between that and Looper was like the big hit.
Yeah,
and critically,
Looper kind of came out of nowhere, especially in terms of like mainstream. It was one of those times, back in 2012, I was like still a teenager, and it was one of those films where it just kind of came out, and all of a sudden my friends were talking about it. Yeah. And it was I wouldn't even say like a massive blockbuster, but it was kind of that modern blockbuster that you don't see a lot of anymore.
Yeah, I don't think people expected it to be good at the time. It was like a late summer release. It was like, oh, it's a time travel movie. Bruce Willis really hasn't been doing anything good lately.
It looked cool to me, but it looked like the type of film that would not get the love it deserved.
Yeah. Also, if you go back and watch the trailer, it's like so 2012. It had like dubstep in the trailer, and it was just like, you know, but
I mean, the entire Joseph Gordon-Levitt playing young Bruce Willis and looking nothing like Joseph Gordon-Levitt was just a real head twister.
But that was a big success critically, financially, and audience wise. Yeah, and that really netted him Star Wars.
And I loved Looper when it came out. And this was, obviously at a time when I would not have been paying attention to directors. So I had no idea who Rian Johnson was. Even when he got Star Wars, I did not realize until like Star Wars was coming out, The Last Jedi was coming out, that was the guy that did Looper. Mm. But when The Last Jedi was announced, that was my only thing. They were like, oh yeah, it's the director that did Looper. And I was like, oh, I loved that movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Looper is I don't think we've actually have we had a film like that? Because there were a lot of films around that time, I would say between like 2005 and 2012, where you could get these, one-shot blockbuster films that were decently budgeted, well cast, and strong films. I feel like it's kind of hard to find those now.
Yeah, a little bit. I think
action
Looper,
realm.
Yeah. Well, Looper, I think Looper is a modern sci-fi classic. Like, I think it really will be, especially in the years to come, remembered as one of the best of the decade. I think Rian Johnson always plays on a level of subversion that, like, he sort of got a bad name for it with The Last Jedi, like, oh, it's supposed to be subversive,
But so what would you say is subversive about Looper, though? Because I think that is a less subversive film than both The Last Jedi and
it
Knives
isn't, but it's in a more subtle way. Like the movie, both Looper and Knives Out at around the 30-minute mark change courses. Like Looper starts as like a very sort of noirish introduction to a Blade Runner feeling world, sort of Philip K. Dick inspired.
Really I was gonna say
they introduce these characters who can levitate coins.
Yeah,
essentially,
it's all the world building is really subtle in that kind of almost Philip K. Dick type of way, where it's like,
but you
weird
sort of
quirks.
feel like you're in for like a typical sci-fi movie, and you're on board with it. It's cool. It's got a good aesthetic, and then about 30 minutes in, when the Bruce Willis starts running free, then there's this point where it you see the same event from young Bruce Willis's perspective and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's perspective and Bruce Willis's perspective. Yeah. Where he's like being attacked by the people that he works for, and then we go back and we see Bruce Willis's story and how he got to the point where we first meet him. And that's where the movie starts to change course. And then it sort of plots along kind of how you expect it for the next little bit, and then it sort of settles down at this farmhouse.
It's a different movie. When you get to the farmhouse, it's a completely different movie.
Yeah, and really the changing, of course, starts at that 30-minute mark. It sort of ditches a lot of the stuff that you might have thought was gonna be a build up to a more core component of the story, and switches courses and becomes a lot smaller and a bit more intimate.
Yeah, the movie never goes into, like, it really never gets a hold of, and I think that's why it feels so contained and kind of quirky within the science fiction realm, because it's such a big plot, but it's handled in such a small way. It's like you never really learn much about the bad guys. You never really faced that much with. I mean, I guess Bruce Willis is the bad guy, but he never feels like the bad guy.
Yeah.
And then you have like the kind of head of the gang, or whatever, the Loopers that Joseph Gordon-Levitt originally works for, but it's never really like handled in a we're going up against the bad guys type of way. There's not a lot of politics, not a lot of plot, not like a twisty turny,
and and the movie handles time travel in a really good way. And that they just say there's plenty of talk about it. There's plenty of
Bruce Willis stops him. He stops him mid talk, and I feel like people try to do this now, like in the Avengers and Endgame and stuff. And Bruce Willis stops. This was back before people really did try time travel that way, though. And he stops Joseph Gordon-Levitt from talking. He's like, "Don't ask me these questions. I don't care."
He's like, "We'll be stuck here drawing diagrams all day."
Yeah.
He's like, "That doesn't matter."
Yeah.
But they tell you like 5 times in the movie. I
felt like it was Rian Johnson that was saying that line, not Bruce Willis.
Yeah, they say it like 3 or 4 times in the movie where they're basically like, it doesn't matter. And it's because people get so caught up in like, oh, the particulars of how time travel works. It's a plot gimmick. Time travel doesn't exist. It doesn't make any sense. It's a plot gimmick. And as long as you pull it off well, as long as you
work within those paradoxes,
as long as I'm not constantly...
I'm cool with it.
As long as it's not constantly distracting and I'm not constantly thinking about it, then I think they did a good job with it. I mean, Back to the Future is one of the greatest time travel movies ever, and that time travel wise, that movie makes no sense. And I think Looper, similarly, you can poke holes in a lot of the plot elements of it, but it actively tells you that part doesn't matter. It's a plot gimmick to really hang the ideas of the story on. And I think in its use of time travel, it's very effective.
Yeah.
It's also really nice to see Bruce Willis care, which is shocking because you're like, oh, this movie is like pretty recent. I mean, it's almost 10 years old at this point.
I don't know that I saw Bruce Willis care that much in that film.
Have you seen his other movies lately?
Yeah.
Or just any time in the last 15 years?
I still don't think it was like he definitely didn't phone the performance in like his latest movies. But I wouldn't say that he was like a focal point of the film. I did think it was hilarious that later on in the film, there's like this one scene, and it's the most bombastic, belligerent action scene where he's like screaming the MF word. Yeah. And you're just like, what movie am I watching? Like all of a sudden, it's like Bruce Willis like wrote into the contract, I need to like hold 2 Tommy guns and just like shoot up like 40 people in the most unbelievable possible way while I scream profanities at them.
One of the things I love about Rian Johnson, though, is that there's this really like quirky indie feel to his tone. Like his movies are like often pretty funny at times, but they don't feel it to like they're tonally clashing. It's very much his style. And part of that bleeds into that scene where it's like it's so over the top and ridiculous. It's
It
almost
just comes
humorous,
out of nowhere.
but it also totally works within the context of the movie and
well,
the
way
character.
they shoot action in the whole movie is kind of like that too. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not as belligerent, like crazy, bombastic action like that one scene was, but the way they handle action is very like, because I mean, even they have like in Looper, they have he's not the bad guy, but the son of the bad guy or whatever, who's like kind of a loser and like he can't do anything right. Like they're already playing on a lot of the action in the movie is kind of like, we're big bad guys, and then like no one is really that great.
Yeah, even their like giant shotgun looks a little toy like.
Yeah.
There's elements to it that feel like it's it doesn't take itself too seriously, but it also doesn't undermine the weight of the story.
Yeah.
Because it's also at times a pretty dark movie. I mean, Bruce Willis is just actively like running around killing children.
I'm like, I honestly rewatched the movie recently, and I was like, I forgot that he just like kills kids.
Yeah.
Like, and it's
just because
like,
they might be the one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's an extremely tight. I think it's a really tight script.
It's
I
one
think
of
it
the
all
last
clicks
times
together really well. I really like the ending.
It's probably one of the last times where especially when it comes to the ending, where I saw a film that was a standalone, contained story that didn't ever try to make itself a big franchise, that I thought handled containing that story and ending it in a satisfying way that was both subversive and exciting, and left me feeling satisfied. I don't feel like a lot of films. I feel like the films that do have any of that are usually franchises now. I feel like action is so dominated by franchises that it was nice to just see two new characters in these roles of being introduced to characters and to watch it all unfold, because if you look back at other movies that are coming out around now, like, and especially a lot of these things are superheroes, but like so many of the big action movies are trying to handle so many things. Whereas in a movie like Looper, it's an action movie, but there's a few characters, so you get to learn and understand the 1, 2, 3 characters in a way that makes you pulled along into the story, which makes the small contained climax of the film hit so much harder than, say, the climax of Justice League.
Yeah,
Like,
I also think Rian Johnson is very good at, or one thing that I really appreciate about just his style of storytelling is that he does like tell a story. A lot of times, especially in modern cinema, it feels like they base a story around a situation and they tell the situation and they stretch it out as far as they can.
Yeah.
He really tells stories that unfold and change as they go. And by the end of it, you feel like you were, pulled along through a journey. And that's something I really appreciate about his style. And I feel like you really feel it in Looper and especially in Knives Out.
Yeah. I really like that movie. It's one, it falls into that category of the films that I kind of forget, but whenever you bring it up, like those movies that came out years ago that never really became these huge blockbuster franchises, you kind of forget about them until you see them on the shelf or you see them on TV and you go, oh yeah, I loved that movie more than a lot of the big movies that come out these days.
Yeah.
But so Looper netted him essentially The Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And while you could say that, I mean, obviously the success of Looper had to have significant effect on him getting a Star Wars film, I'm not sure that if I was a studio executive at Disney that I would have seen Looper and thought, oh, naturally I want this person to direct Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Like, does that not feel a little bit strange to you?
Yeah.
Because Looper's not the type of film that anyone in Star Wars would want.
Yeah, but it makes sense. He made a sci-fi movie, so naturally, get him to make a sci-fi franchise movie.
I guess
that's sort of the mentality behind it. But I mean, if you look at the director of Empire Strikes Back, you wouldn't have expected him to do a Star Wars movie either.
I guess I just think
Star Wars movies have always been more like
going to Star Wars, not. Like, I feel like you can see that, and you see it unfold now. Everything, hindsight is 2020. Everyone's seen the saga play out for what happened to Star Wars over those 3 Disney movies and the varying opinions of them and the backlash and whatnot. But even at the time, I just think it was very easy to see like, oh, J.J. Abrams is directing The Force Awakens? Naturally, like this guy who's like knows about picking up franchises in these worlds and things like that. But to go to a director that is so particular and has such a distinct style,
I think they had the right idea. And I think Rian Johnson could have made a great Star Wars movie.
He made a really great trailer.
Yeah,
The trailers for The Last Jedi to this day are better than the trailers for, I think, any Star Wars film.
I will stand by. I think that there are moments and threads in The Last Jedi that work better than a lot of things in all of Star Wars, like in all of the main films. I think that there's ideas in there that are genuinely interesting and subversive. I think he brings elements to it that you just don't see in Star Wars movies because of the way Star Wars movies are seen to, like, that's how a Star Wars movie is supposed to be. I think he brought a fresh perspective to parts of it. For me, the movie just has a lot of baggage, and a large stretch of the middle section just totally doesn't work.
Do you think that he could not, when it comes to, because I would actually agree with that. I am a pretty large and vocal about not liking The Last Jedi at all, thinking it is a truly awful movie across the board. But that's largely based on how the whole movie played out. I can look into The Last Jedi and Rian Johnson and see the threads that could have been. There were a lot of threads just because I think the movie was bad. And that seemed to have become the majority opinion around that film. I can easily look at it and say it wasn't that it was bad from the jump. It wasn't in that it didn't have good ideas. There were a lot of threads that, if pulled correctly, could have made it the best Star Wars film to come around. Like I said, I saw the trailer for The Last Jedi and I was so excited. I was the most excited for The Last Jedi as I've probably been for a film in a long time. So to be so disappointed, I think the question is, do you think that it was in Rian Johnson's execution that he messed up the execution, or that he struggled to execute against the studio's wishes? Like, when it comes to, there were a lot of things, I don't want to get into like a movie review of The Last Jedi, but there were a lot of things in that film where, you would see the right idea, but it would be executed poorly or go in the wrong direction. Or like you said, there was a lot of baggage. I mean, obviously everyone on the planet knows about the Canto Bight sequence. But do you think that is Rian Johnson straying from the path? Or do you think it was him not being allowed to do the thing he wanted to do? So it being kind of like a half him, half studio, neither really meshing.
I think on one hand, he was written into a corner in certain elements. Like all these Star Wars fans who hate the way that Luke was portrayed in The Last Jedi, please tell me a heroic, very true to character Luke reason as to why he was hiding away on an island during all of that. Like, it was very much a J.J. Abrams mystery box where he didn't know what was inside of it, and Rian Johnson had to write his way out of it.
I think you could have. Now that being said, I think you could have written your way out of it a lot better.
I think you could
write a true. I would not have put him, if I was J.J. Abrams, I would not have put him on that island to begin with. But I think you could have written out of it in a way that was satisfying.
I think you wrote him out. I like the way you wrote him out of it. That's one of the core disagreements about The Last Jedi. I actually really like the direction that Luke's character went in. But anyway, what I think is that I think he saw certain characters and was like, I know where I want to take these and I know what I want to do with these. And then he went, I don't know what to do with Finn. Kind of don't know what to do with Poe. Kind of need them to be treading water for most of the movie. Kind of only want to focus on Luke, Kylo, and Rey. That seemed to be like, it seemed like he was really interested in those characters, and the rest of them were like, all right, we're gonna kind of just have you, filling time. You're gonna mark time until the climax. And I feel like that's my core issue with The Last Jedi, is that you have 3 different storylines or 3 different threads that are running parallel. Only one of them is moving, and only one of them is moving in an interesting direction, and the others take up a large portion of the movie but are kind of just marking time until you can get to the last planet. That's what I think went wrong with the movie, and I think that's partly his fault. I think it's partly Abrams' fault for just the way it was set up to begin with, because it's clear it was set up in that Abrams mystery box way where he didn't know and didn't have to know because he knew he was handing it off to somebody else. So I think that there was just a lot wrong with the setup going into it, and I think all the interesting ideas, all the subversive ideas and inventive things that he brought to a certain portion of the movie. And I feel like he didn't really know what to do, having to deal with like 9 characters.
I think you could have done everything that he wanted to do with Star Wars in a satisfying way. I think it was that there was more to be done with the story, and the execution was off. I don't think that his core ideas were horrible. I do not like the way he took Luke, or the way he executed Luke, quite literally. But I do think that that was part of it. Like, I think it was okay to kill Luke. I would have preferred them do it in the 3rd movie. But I think it was okay to kill Luke. I think he needed to die. It was the way in which he died and the way in which it was handled across the board for the film. And I think small tweaks. I think you could rewrite like 6 scenes in that film and all of a sudden have a really great film. Because there were a lot of little bitty elements.
Well, he's also
that
Rian Johnson is a much stronger visual storyteller than like Abrams is. Like, just not just like, oh, that's a pretty shot, but I mean just the simple juxtaposition of 2 shots.
Mm-hmm.
He is far more interesting in the way that he puts them together.
Yeah.
And even some of the stuff with like Luke sort of training, but not being resistant to the idea of training Rey. There's bits where it's like, you can clearly tell like, oh, he wants to come out of that and he wants to, but he sees the danger in it. And it's like, it's very well conveyed visually, which is something you often don't get in a Star Wars movie, where the, dialogue is like always just telling you exactly how people feel and exactly what they need to do. So there's a nice subtlety to parts of that.
But then on the flip side, you do have like the atrocious Rey training scenes where she's like swinging the baseball bat at like rocks, and Rian Johnson has clearly no idea of how lightsabers work, or like the really awkward throne room sequence where it looks so cool the first time you watch it, and then when you watch it back through and realize that everything about it is really weird and every stuntman has no idea what's going on. And like it's the holes do come through, and I highlight those because
also I just gotta highlight the shot where Snoke gets killed and the lightsaber like comes towards the camera and then is caught. Incredible.
Yeah.
Like, whatever you think of the context surrounding that scene, that shot is amazing.
I agree with that. And it comes down to, I mean, a lot of the decisions he made, they were one decision away from being great, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, there were sequences, like Snoke dying was not a problem. Everyone hated Snoke dying. Mm-hmm. That was not the problem. It was the way in which he died. And if they had given us one more scene, if they had given us one more thing, if they had built it around it, and this could be, this part of this is J.J. Abrams' fault, but if they had built Snoke better, killing him was not a problem. Same thing goes for Luke. If they had built Luke better or given him one more beat around this, killing him was not a problem.
Well, if you think about...
It was the fact that so much felt unfulfilled about it, and that's the problem with Subversion. Subversion is great, but you have to do it in a way that makes it's... Brandon Sanderson talks about this all the time on writing, about how when you're building a story, it's important to subvert the audience. It's like a core element of just about any book these days, because everything is so derivative. You need to have subversion, but what you need to do when you're subverting is, when you subvert the audience, you have to give them something that they didn't realize that they wanted. You have to be building them towards something, and that was the problem with Rian Johnson's rendition, was that he kind of built the audience, he strung them along, and just he subverted them by being like, no, you want this, you don't want what you want this, but he didn't give us a reason to want this. You have to insert on your way to that big subversion. You need to insert things that make the audience be pulled in that direction subconsciously, so that when the big reveal or whatever it is, the big subversion happens, it's something that they can cheer for. And that was the big problem with Star Wars. And it's really complicated when you have a fan base like Star Wars and such a storied history.
Yeah.
But I did not feel like he laid the groundwork.
Well, the other thing is that the Last Jedi is the fastest script that he's ever written. He normally takes a long time to write his movies. Like, I think he was writing Looper for like 4 or 5 years. And he says that like his first movie, Brick, he spent like 5 or 6 years writing. Mm-hmm. Last Jedi, I think he started writing it as they were shooting The Force Awakens. And then they shot very quickly after. Mm-hmm. So probably a year. So if you take most of his movies were written within like a 5 to 6 year span, and then The Last Jedi was written in a year. If you think about the fact that like some of these ideas are great, but as you say, they're like one step away from, it's almost like he needed the 5 years to write it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the cap on The Last Jedi that I have, is is that there were a lot of good ideas there, and they were all even down to the scene by scene, even down to the scenes that could have been executed well but weren't. Like things like Rey's training scene could have been so great. It was shot so great, but why is she swinging that thing like a baseball bat? Like, why is it chopping through rocks in this really weird fashion? There were basic. I mean, the throne room sequence is so gorgeous, colors and composition wise, but the actual execution is off. I felt like that when it came down to the story beats as well. It's like everything was one step away from being amazing, and that step, it's like the floor was being built as the movie was walking, and then it stopped being built, and the movie, being the character, fell off that cliff. It wasn't like they stumbled. It was like you just plummeted down to the earth below.
One of the things I do that really bothers me about the reception of The Last Jedi is that I feel like people should always take interesting failures over boring failures. And The Rise of Skywalker is the most boring failure possible. And it's a failure on every level. Yet people were basically like, well, at least it wasn't as bad as The Last Jedi. Yeah, because it didn't try as hard. Yeah, it avoided being a train wreck because there was nothing in the train.
It's someone who considers, like, I personally do consider The Last Jedi to be a massive train wreck. I vastly prefer what Rian Johnson tried to do and failed to do to anything about The Rise of Skywalker.
But it's like there's this general idea that, like, yeah, it's not as bad because it didn't try as hard. It's like, that's not a good thing. The Rise of Skywalker
was an insult to storytelling. It was an insult to Star Wars and its legacy. And Rian Johnson did. I mean, a lot of people would say, and I would even agree to certain extents, that what he did was insulting to Star Wars. However, I would much rather prefer someone try. Someone try to do something different. Someone try to subvert. It didn't come out right to me at all. But I would still take, as much as it hurts me to say this, like, because I'm so disappointed in everything Disney has done with Star Wars. But I would much rather, I'd say that out of the three movies, I mean, I think The Force Awakens is probably the best film all around if you're just looking at a film, but of the three, which doesn't say much because all three movies were, I think if you look back, they were all pretty bad. They're just poorly executed movies. But I would say that what Rian Johnson tried to do was more applaudable than either of the other three movies, because you can say that The Force Awakens was a better movie, but J.J. Abrams also did absolutely nothing on his own in that movie. There was nothing new to that movie. And there was nothing spectacular to that movie. There was no creativity injected into that movie. All he did was throw Harrison Ford and the Millennium Falcon onto the screen and ignite a lightsaber, and everyone said yay, including myself. But I mean, Rian Johnson took it and tried to really make it something new, and if executed well, I think it would have ushered in a new era of Star Wars. I think that's what he was trying to do, but the threads were
sadly the failure, and especially the backlash of it, sort of means that it feels like, at least for a time, everything that we get will be the most empty type of fan service. Right, like the response to Last Jedi not being fan service is The Mandalorian, a show that is comprised entirely of please applaud now moments. Yeah,
literally the most empty.
And that's what you're getting. That's what you're going to get. That's the issue with, like, the backlash of those type of movies. It's like the backlash of the prequels leads to a carbon copy of the original. So it's like you got to be careful in the discourse around it, and the discourse around The Last Jedi was not only not intelligent, but it was just it turned into just insults and people acting really stupid over it.
Well, and
there are intelligent conversations around it.
Was intelligent around it. It's that when you get, I mean, it's one thing to have a bunch of YouTubers or major critics or whatever writing, really.
I mean, the fan
intelligent
base's discourse was not.
Yeah, it's the fact that when you go into the YouTube comments or the Facebooks or the tweets or whatever it is, and that's when you get into that when you get into any major fan base, especially if it's a toxic one or a really particular one or a really passionate one. Yeah. But it's that discourse that's going to lead you to The Rise of Skywalker, a movie created entirely by fan backlash, not by people. Yeah. And I mean, when it comes to everything Star Wars to this point, I mean, to even try to figure out how to save it. I mean, I know how you would save it, but the only way to save it to me is to burn it all and restart. Not restart the series, but is to wipe away everything that they did since Disney bought it, which is so beyond what you can do. I mean, I think they can turn it around and do some great shows and some great films, and I hope that they do. I don't see that coming in the future, but it's one of those things where you can't. It's really hard to look back and be like, well, if they'd just done this one thing, it would have saved it, because it's so far gone now that it's like trying to even make a sense of it now. I feel really bad for the director that has to helm the next Star Wars film.
No.
I feel really bad for them. But so after The Last Jedi, I would say that Rian Johnson became a really controversial figure.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wouldn't say that. That's obvious. Like, everyone knows that there was a lot of positive reception at first around The Last Jedi, but it quickly became pretty awful across the board, I would say. Seemingly unanimous just by the loudness of the voices. I'd say I knew a lot of people that really liked The Last Jedi that I disagreed with. But over the time, either they got quiet or changed their minds.
I see a lot of very positive reception. It's typically not from hardcore Star Wars fans. It's typically from people who weren't big fans of Star Wars. That's the thing that I noticed. Is that
I would agree with that.
And that's an interesting thing, because it's like he brought something to Star Wars that people who didn't like Star Wars, something about it drew them to it, and it ended up alienating Star Wars fans.
Yeah,
I just think it's interesting, the people that like it versus the people that don't.
It's a weird web, honestly. I don't know exactly how to make sense of it, but coming off of that, what's really interesting though is that as someone who really enjoyed Looper and then saw Star Wars and was really disappointed and really kind of done with Star Wars in general after that, really kind of down around that, and I would say I was down around Rian Johnson as a director. I was really just had no faith in him to turn around and release a movie like Knives Out. Honestly, just blew me away. Mm-hmm. Because as someone who came in with, I came into Knives Out with prejudice. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I was, I'm like, the guy who ruined Star Wars. And Knives Out is an undeniably fantastic film.
Yep.
Across the board.
It's a little you get that blinded by Star Wars bias thing, because movies are incredibly hard to make, and when you make 4 good ones and then 1 dud, it's kind of ridiculous for people to write off your entire career. I mean, making 1 good movie is super hard. The dude made 4 and then made Star Wars, and everybody's like, he should never direct again.
Yeah, no.
It's just like, no.
I mean, I would have never thought that he should. I personally would. I know you're not saying I said this, but like, I would have never thought that he shouldn't direct another movie. But it really did surprise me to be like, oh, well, maybe he's not as good as we thought, and then to turn around and be like, no, he's better. I mean, I think that Knives Out was better than anything he's done so far. I think that Knives Out, while I did really enjoy Looper, I think Knives Out was the culmination of everything he's done so far in the best way possible. Yeah. It was the cleanest, tightest, most wowing from the cinematography to the script to the execution of the dialogue, the composition of the film across the board was the top of his game, in my opinion. To the point where, I mean, he's shooting a Knives Out 2, right? Yeah. I'm not exactly sure where they're going to go with that story. I don't know if I think they're just going to do. Are they just going to do a new story,
a new mystery with Daniel Craig again? I think
okay.
And I like that.
I'm happy with that. That's what I just don't want to see like anything else. I think they're just those characters.
No, I think that they're just going to get another huge cast, another big like all-star cast, and keep Daniel Craig. He seems to very much want to play with the old, like, so you don't get them anymore, like murder mystery movies.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the Murder on the Orient Express vibe, where it's like big cast of like popular characters with the one, hook of the detective or person trying to solve the mystery. I'm really excited about that. It's not the type of film where I'd be like, I want a new Knives Out, but like to hear that that's where that he's going with it, I'm very interested in seeing that.
Yeah, and the movie, the movie's like, I love murder mystery movies. But a lot of people have the view of murder mysteries where like there's no point in watching it again after you know who did it. But it's like he solves that issue by making the majority of the movie not a murder mystery. Like he does it similar to what I was saying that he did in Looper, where it sort of changes course after 30 minutes.
Yeah,
he does that.
That movie is the most subversive movie he's done.
Yeah, he does that really beautifully in Knives Out, where it starts out like, well, it actually already starts out a little bit subversive to the normal murder mystery, because the normal murder mystery movie starts with like people gathering, and then somebody dies, and then they discover the body, and then that's sort of the typical thing. And his movie starts and the guy's already dead, and then it sort of plays back. It uses the he doesn't tell the audience things that they know multiple times. he uses a really clean time jumping plot device where he has them interviewed at the beginning, and you're introduced to all the characters in a very clean way. There's so many characters, yet you know all of them, you know all their name, you know what they're doing, you know why they're there, you know whose family they're with. And he does that in such a clean way in the interview scenes early on.
Well, he also handles character incredibly well in that film. In that, and I think a lot of murder mysteries do this well because they have to. But I thought he did this exceptionally well, where he really built out all the characters well.
Yeah,
I think it's really easy to be like, who done it? They, copy paste this personality or this history, like this backstory for this character. Whereas that's not exactly how that film felt.
Yeah,
it's very easy to copy and paste those personalities and just be like, this is the girl who works in this, the butler, this, the that,
And the point of subversion, like the point in the movie that it comes at, is so perfect because you've just learned who all these characters are, and you like in your head are in for a murder mystery, and you start thinking like, all right, who did it? And then as soon as they finish introducing all these characters, all the like motives, why they're there and all that, and then you get the bit with Marta. Mm-hmm. where you go back in time and you see exactly how the guy died, or seemingly exactly how he died, and then you're like, oh, okay, so this is a totally different movie now. This isn't a mystery anymore. This is a thriller. Mm-hmm. And then it turns into a like you're on the side of the killer, essentially. Like you want to see her escape. And even Daniel Craig's character is like seems like a caricature at first, but you realize that he's smarter than he seems. He is over the top, and he is kind of a caricature, but he's also a really smart detective. Mm-hmm. Just everything about it was pulled off. Like it was pulled off so clean and so like just pinpoint, like perfect. It's kind of the exact opposite of what you're saying about The Last Jedi, of it being like a scene off. It's like this perfect from like start to finish. Like nothing feels out of place. It really like the plot really just works like a watch. Like it just everything clicks.
So here's my question though. I would not have expected, I'm fine with it. I would have not expected him to go in the direction of Knives Out 2. I would have expected him to do a new movie. That's kind of what I assumed it would be until I heard that he was doing another one. That being said, how much of Knives Out 1 do you think was Knives Out 1? What do you think is replicable? Because obviously he can't copy and paste that. If we're going back to another murder mystery type of film, like, where do you think he goes? Because he has his history of subversion. So obviously he's in his mind, he's probably thinking when he's writing this Knives Out 2 script, he's got to do something bigger and better, or, in a different direction. He's got to subvert what you expected from Knives Out 1. Right. So after seeing how well he did on Knives Out 1, I'm very excited to see where he goes with Knives Out 2. And I have a bit of faith in him. However, you just laid out the groundwork for Knives Out 1 and why it worked. That cannot be copied in Knives Out 2 in any way, shape, or form. So how do you subvert the subversion?
Yeah, that's actually why
I think that's the direction you need to go, is subvert the subversion.
That's why I'm actually really interested in it.
You cannot copy and paste that.
Is because I don't know what he's going to do. Like, I don't know where you go after that.
I don't exactly just want a good murder mystery film from him.
Every movie that he's made has very much been like, all right, that's his take on the genre, and now he's going to move on to another genre.
Yeah.
So going back, I think is going to be interesting, and I think he's really going to have to do something different and inventive. I think he can do a lot just with setting. Like Knives Out's a very classic, mansion setting. I think he can do a lot just by changing up the setting. But like, is this one going to play it more as a straight murder mystery, or is he going to head it in a totally different direction?
There's a lot of different dressings on Knives Out that are good and great and make it a really enjoyable film. But like you said, it's really the, who is the killer? The killer is actually the person that you're cheering for. The switch from mystery to more thriller, the way they tell you about what happened and how everything went about and unfold all the different characters. And there's lots of switches, and some of the things are very murder mystery tropes that get slight subversions or none at all. But then there's the major things where he deviates. But that can't be copied and pasted into the next film. So do we subvert the subversion, or, does he fall? Is there a possibility that he can fall victim to making almost a less different murder mystery? Like, we don't really want just a murder mystery from him, even though I do like the idea of, we miss murder mysteries in film. I think I'd be happy with a film like that, but would it be better than Knives Out 1?
Yeah, I think.
Like, how do you make it better?
For like any other writer director, like the focal point might switch to be Daniel Craig's character, because he isn't really the focal point of Knives Out.
I don't know if that works though.
But I don't think Rian Johnson will do that, because while his characters are always really good in his movies and they always feel very fleshed out, his movies are almost they're character driven, but they're not about the complexities of the character in the traditional sense. His movies are more about how the character functions within the plot. Like he's very obsessed with like plot reversals, plot subversions. Those are his that's what he likes to play with. So I don't feel like he'll go for like a smaller, it's about Daniel Craig type plot. I think he's gonna have to dig really deep to find an interesting new angle on it.
Yeah.
I'm
and if you
really
focus
just excited
on Daniel
to
Craig
see
at
where
all,
he
I
goes
think
with it.
I don't think that Rian Johnson would fall exactly victim to this, but I don't want to see the side character that everyone loved now gets the spotlight and it's not as good anymore. You know, the Johnny Depp, the Pirates of the Caribbean route, you know, which obviously, you know, this isn't a bombastic franchise Disney type of film, so I wouldn't expect that to happen exactly that way. But I do think that if you gave Daniel Craig the spotlight, I think as an actor he's capable, but that character, I don't want that caricature character. Even though there was depth to the character, I'm not dissing the character at all. I just think that I don't think the character would function to the same capacity if given more. So, but how do you replace? I mean, the other thing is Marta was just such a great protagonist.
I think they'll probably do a similar. Have a secondary protagonist that's more the protagonist than Daniel Craig. I don't know where you really take it from there, but I have faith in him because
I'm excited. I think that's like the best place to leave it. I mean, I don't know where he goes, and I think is that not the most Rian Johnson way to be? Though?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know where he goes.
I think he's one of the strongest directors working, or strongest writer directors working today, and I look forward to every new movie that he does. So,
I mean, now that Star Wars is behind him, now that in my mind, I know for a lot of people this won't be the case, but Knives Out kind of wiped away that past or that scuff mark on his career for me, and you know, I think that's the best place you can be is in where he's doing something unexpected. I mean, if he's all about being unexpected, going back to make a episode 2 of a film is something I wouldn't have expected from him. So it's interesting to see that he's going to hopefully continue to subvert in a hopefully satisfying way. I mean, for all we know, Knives Out 2 could crash and burn, but you know, the fact that I have no idea where he's going gives me more faith.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for watching this episode of the Cortright Cast. I think that pretty much wraps up everything that I have to say about the career. The very interesting, as we say, I find out that, you know, I feel like there's a lot more to talk about. I feel like you could actually ruminate on the career of Rian Johnson for quite some time because it's, I mean, just that trilogy of completely disconnected films, Looper to The Last Jedi to Knives Out it's so storied, you know, as far as I'm concerned. But, so thank you guys for watching this episode. If you enjoy this podcast, be sure to leave a like on the YouTube channel, subscribe to it, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever your podcast providers are, and we will talk to you guys in the next episode.